Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Tell Your Story. I'm your host, Todd Nesloni, the Director of Culture and Strategic Leadership for TEPSA. And each episode, I look to bring you a different guest who has encouraged, inspired, or challenged me in one way or another, and bring them on to share some of their story in hopes that it inspires you to share some of yours. I'm thrilled this episode to have my friend and special guest, Kyle Hoops, on with me. Kyle, tell everybody a little bit about who you are.
Hey everyone, my name is Kyle Hoops. I am a principal at Grove Crest Elementary in Pleasant Grove, Utah. So I live in Pleasant Grove. I live about a half a mile away from my school. I've been a principal for 7 years, been in education for almost 20. My wife is also an educator, and we have 4 adopted kids, 2 grandkids, and I just found out about a month ago that I'll be transferring to another school, which is an interesting thing because that's the first time I've had to do that. So Anyway, there you go.
So we got a lot to chat about today. Well, Kyle, first of all, I want to ask, everybody's got a different path to education. When you were growing up, did you know education was going to be in your career path?
That's an interesting question. My dad was an educator all my growing up, but my dad did a lot of different things in order to support our family. So, he was an educator by day. Sometimes he'd work at the local sawmill. He was also a member of our National Guard, and he was a volunteer fireman as well. So I had a lot of different things to choose from as far as what I wanted to do. My mom, she supported education, and she was actually on the school board up in Wyoming where I grew up, and she was just a supporter of that. But at one time I was like, oh, I'm going to be a fireman, and I've got plenty of stories to tell about being a fireman when I was very young. And then, my dad was in the Army, so I'm going to be an Army guy. But I think when I finally left home and I actually went on a church service mission for my church for 2 years in Australia, and came back. I think it was after that I realized, teaching is what I wanted to do. I wasn't sure exactly what, but I knew I wanted to be a teacher probably about that time.
So Did I hear you correctly? You just said you went on a mission trip for 2 years to Australia?
Yep, I was in Sydney, Australia for 2 years. I went there when I was 19 and came back when I was 21.
So I'm so interested in that to start with. So talk to me a little bit about that. How did that come up, and how did you at 19 years old make the commitment that I'm going to go for 2 years and serve over in a different country?
Well, it's an interesting thing. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. A lot of people know us as Mormons. And it's kind of part of our culture that, at least when I was that age, when a young man turns 19, that they go on a mission. It's a choice thing, obviously, but they can go on a mission. And then young ladies, when they were 21, they could go on a mission. So I was actually in Australia at the same time as my older sister, Ashley, was in England. And then when I was in Sydney for about a year and a half, my younger brother, Blake, was in Australia on his mission. He came over time. But it's kind of part of our church called that young men and young women go out on missions. Now it's 18 for boys and 19 for girls.
Wow.
Is the okay age. You can go after that if you want. Yeah.
So what would you say is probably the biggest thing you learned about yourself when you were on this mission trip in Australia?
Oh my gosh. I would say I came across, I'm a pretty shy person. And I know that when I was out there, it was really, really hard for me to approach people and talk to them about my religion. As much as I love my Heavenly Father and my Savior Jesus Christ, and as much as I believe in my church and the things that we teach, it was really, really hard for me to approach people and talk to them about that. I was afraid of rejection. I've always been one that I don't like conflict a whole lot. I'll avoid it sometimes, whether it's good or bad. And so I remember the very first part of my mission, my companion and I, we always go out into, you'll see us all the time. If you've ever seen missionaries from my church, we wear the tags on our shirts, everything. And I remember out to a walk mall and sitting by people for many, many minutes, not saying a word, because I didn't know exactly how to start a conversation. I wanted to start it out as, hey, how you doing? How's everything going? Trying to develop some sort of friendship. And then all of a sudden, oh, by the way, have you heard of Church of Jesus? You know, kind of whatever our intro to whatever we were trying to teach. And so I think the biggest thing that I picked up on my mission was the ability, really the comfort to talk with people who were complete strangers. You know, case in point, when my wife and I got married, we went on our honeymoon to San Diego. And I could just start out a conversation with our cab driver just out of nowhere, you know, like, hey, how you doing? You know, I was, yeah, we just got married, and you know, and so kind of funny. And my wife at that time, at least, wasn't real used to that. And I've had to tone myself. I do get a little bit crazy sometimes, but yeah, I think that was the biggest thing, that I had the ability to talk to people and to befriend them and to help them feel noticed. I think that was one thing that I picked up when I was out there. I mean, and of course, just a greater appreciation and testimony of the gospel as I know it, and all that comes from serving in that way. So yeah,
I love that's so interesting to me. I just love that story, but I also love that throughout that experience, it kind of helped you figure out your voice and feel comfortable enough in that. Because I know that even now as a school leader, I'm sure that plays a lot into that. And so, you know, jumping back into the educational side of things, when did you decide that you were ready for that next step from being classroom teacher to school leader?
I was teaching at the time at junior high. I was a math teacher at junior high in my district, and there were 4 of us that decided, hey, let's go join this online. Well, it wasn't online, but YouTube was where I got my master's degree in school leadership, and we all decided, hey, let's do this together. I made a huge. I didn't even at that time when I started to do that, like thinking, oh, I'm going to be a principal somewhere. It was just an opportunity to learn and to be better. And I'll tell you what, if any of you out there that are listening that want to go into a program like that, do it with some buddies. That makes the world of difference, because we did. We fed off each other. We worked with each other. We helped each other with our assignments, tests, and we did it together. And now all 4 of us are administrators somewhere in my district. I'm an elementary school teacher or school principal. All the others are secondary, which is kind of funny. But what happened?
Did you always know that elementary was going to be in your path, or did you ever think it might be secondary?
I was, you know, when I applied for both. But I started out teaching as an elementary school teacher. I started out teaching 5th grade for 5 years before I jumped to the junior high. Was there for 7 years. But when I applied, I felt like elementary was where I would be. I thought that was where I could be the most influential, I guess you could say. And at the same time, I would have been happy, completely and totally happy being at a secondary school. But at the time, I was like, oh, I hope I go elementary. And that's kind of how it happened. I started out as an assistant principal at 2 different schools where I shared every other day. I went one day at one school and another day at another school. After that first year, I was assigned to the school I'm at now, Go Crest. Hey, Go Crest Nation! So.
I love that. Well, Kyle, you know, I know you serve a lot in the schools and you've been in education and all these things too. But something else that I really found interesting in your intro was that you also have 4 adoptive children. So when did you decide that adoption was right for you? And talk to me a little bit about that process and kind of what you've learned through that.
I knew that my wife and I were going to adopt probably before we were even married. So When I came home from my mission when I was 21, I was so afraid of girls because we were always told arm's length, no hugs or anything like that. And so that like
Oh, I lost you, Kyle. Come back and start talking again. I lost you after the arm's length comment. And while we wait for Kyle's Wi-Fi to reconnect, I will kill time again as I'm getting better and better at this with more and more guests that I have on in getting the Wi-Fi to work. When we're all at home using it all the time, sometimes our Wi-Fi isn't as reliable. So we'll see if Kyle reconnects here.
You there?
Yes, I hear you now. Oh, and he jumped out now, so hopefully he'll jump right back in and share more of his story with where he is right now with his journey through not only education but through life. And it's kind of the whole idea behind this series is that, yes, I interview a lot of educators. Not all of them are educators. A lot of them are. But the whole idea was that we would share life through this story as well. And so that's why I love hearing about his experience in Australia and kind of what that was like to go there for not only just like a month or a week, like most people do mission trips for a few weeks, but for 2 years to experience that. And then to know the story of adoption as well. So I think he is back. Goodness, that weed eater is so loud outside my door. Okay, there he is. So Kyle, so talk to me. We were talking about adoption. And so talk to me about, you said, at arm's length is what you were used to. So go from there.
Right. Oh, okay. So it took a girl that I knew from my hometown to help me feel comfortable in going out on a date with my wife. And she ended up being my one and only date after I got back. And so that was kind of nice. But one of the things I learned when we were very serious about getting married and stuff like that, one thing I learned is that when she was younger in high school, she had a pituitary adenoma, a cancer on her pituitary gland that made it so that at least when she was 16, she was told she wasn't going to be able to have kids on her own. Right. So we knew when we were going to get married, when we got married, that was probably how we were going to have kids. And so, like I said, I have 4 kids. 2 of them I adopted through my church, both of them babies. So my first adoption, who is not my oldest child, but my first adoption, he is now 18 years old.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, my second adoption is my one little girl, and she's now 16 years old. And then my oldest, who is 25, he'll be 26 here in a few months. And my youngest are half brothers from the same mom, and we adopted them through foster care. So that in itself was a pretty interesting story, because we first brought Casey, my oldest, into our home with his older sister, and we brought him in for just a summer, and then they both left, and then Casey came back, and while Casey was with us, his birth mom was going to have another baby, which happened to be my youngest, Cam, and so we brought him in at birth. And so yeah, that has been an amazing story. Casey we adopted when he was 12, and he had quite a history before he came to our home. Just the things that he experienced and shared with us were they were unreal stories that he would tell us. And he's had some struggles in his life that he's been able to come out of, and he's a good kid. He's made a complete turnaround with his life, but he still has some urges and struggles just because he's been pulled out of his home. I mean, we weren't the first foster family that he'd been in several foster families even before us because of the addictions that his mom was dealing with. And so
I'd like to talk a little bit about, first of all, I'd like to kind of think, you talked about how you adopted 2 children through your church as babies, that kind of thing, and then you did some foster care. And so did you do foster care with the hopes of adoption, or foster care because you just felt led to work with those kind of kids while they were in that transition period?
We wanted to adopt. We wanted to have more kids, and so I think when we first went into adoption, that was kind of the idea. Interestingly enough, Casey and his older sister was at the elementary school I was working at, and we at the time weren't considering foster care until I talked to his older sister's teacher and learned about that they were in foster care and that they were going to be pulled from their current foster family because of family issues there. And we're like, oh, well, we may want to bring them into my house, kind of thing like that. So I came home and talked to my wife about it, and she says, yes, of course. And so that summer we brought them both into our house, and there were some issues there where they left, and then Casey came back. So, yeah, initially, when Casey came in during the summer, we had like a father and sons outing with my church, and I at that time considered him my son, and I'd only known him for a month, maybe 2 months. But at the time I considered him my son. And so when the opportunity came for us to be able to adopt them both on the same day, Casey and then my youngest Cam on the same day, it's an unreal experience to be able to adopt. And a lot of people ask about how, oh, you're so good, that you were so nice to adopt. I'm like, no, this is just how we have kids. Yeah. We don't go through the process a lot of other people. This is how we have kids. We're blessed because we get to do it. That's the way it is. So,
well, I love that story so much. One thing that I've talked with other foster parents and adoptive parents about is that working with those kids when they come from really difficult backgrounds, being a parent is hard enough as it is. And so how do you balance kind of working with them in that whole new things that maybe you haven't been through in your own life, but helping them handle those new emotions underneath a new kind of parenting?
It's taken a lot. I mean, our other 3 kids, because we adopted them at birth, the whole identity thing with them wasn't as hard. One of the things that we've tried to do with all of our adoptive kids is to keep the lines open with their adoptive parents. And so, Cam and Casey, we know that their mom, even though she struggles with some addictions and life experiences too, we know she lives a town away from us, and we have her phone number. And we can talk to her, and we don't see her as much. My 2 in the middle that we adopted first, both their birth moms live within a 30-minute drive of us, and we see them all the time. And so the identity thing for them was never in question. My 18-year-old just this last summer met his birth dad for the first time, which was an interesting experience for him. And then my daughter, she doesn't know who her birth dad is, and I don't believe, well, her birth mom thinks she knows who it is, but there's question there.
So throughout this whole process, what I mentioned, what did you learn about yourself through the mission work? But I also love to know, what have you been learning about yourself through foster care, adoption, being a dad, all that kind of stuff?
That it's hard. Raising kids is hard, whether they're through adoption or through, biological means or whatever. It's a hard thing. And each one of our kids are different. They each have their own strengths. They each have their own weaknesses, just like I do. And I think the thing that I've learned the most about it is that you can't parent, you can't teach a child. They're just different, and so you have to approach them and talk with them in different ways. I've recognized that I have to be very, very careful about fair attention to each one of my kids. Sometimes I lose track of that, and I have to be reminded, hey, this child over here needs some attention from you. I'm like, I have to remember that, and it's kind of hard. But I have some really, really great examples of parents. My wife's parents are phenomenal parents. My own parents were wonderful. My mom passed away in 2011. but they were great parents who I knew they loved me, and that's what I hope that my kids understand. Even though I have my weaknesses as a parent and as a person, that they know that I absolutely, without a doubt, unconditionally love them, and they are the world to me. So,
well, I love that. And you can tell by the way you talk about them how much they mean to you, which I think is always a great sign how you can understand how somebody feels. And so, Kyle, when you reflect on your own life and all the many experiences you've been through, the ups and downs, what is one instance that really stands out to you as being really instrumental in creating the man we see today?
oh, God. One time?
Yeah, I'm sure you got lots of examples, but if you were just to narrow it down to one, what would it be?
Oh, geez. Well, I guess to pick one, I think at one time I was going through a fairly dark period in my life, struggling with some different things and stuff like that. Taking therapy a little bit more seriously than I'd had done in other times. And I wrote a letter to myself without looking at my computer. I was told by my therapist, don't put the screen down and just start typing. Mm-hmm. And so I did, and it opened my eyes to some feelings that I was having. And at one point I had to talk with my parents, each individually, and I got pretty upset with them, asking why did you do this? Why were you doing this? Didn't you know I needed attention here? And I got pretty vocal with both of them at separate times. And I saw how both my parents reacted to how I was behaving. And then I came back to maybe about 2 years ago, where I went back to my dad and I apologized to him for how I treated him. But I think the thing that helped me was to recognize that I had to say something. I had to voice what I was going through, what my concerns were, whether they were right or wrong. I had people who would hear me, my dad and my mom, who would hear me, what I was struggling with, and would blame them for those things, which is not a good thing to do, right? But they would listen to me and take it. And then after it's all over, they loved me enough to take that and then help me through it. I think that was another case where I found my voice. I
think that's powerful too, just for people to hear that, no matter what's going on in somebody's life or what you see on the surface, there's a lot of things that we're all dealing with, we've all been through, that play a really big part in creating the people we are today. And so I really appreciate you kind of sharing that and it being vulnerable in that way, because I think that helps all of us grow. And, Kyle, one thing that I always love to end all these conversations on is there are lots of people who listen to these who are in education, who aren't. And when I think about doing these shows, I really think of picking people with that just want to get out there and share pieces of themselves. And so when you think about your perspective on life and everything like that, what is one thing that you just hold really dear that you just wish more people knew or understood? What's your one thing?
Family matters. Family's huge. And when I talk about family, first and foremost, my wife. Man, she's an amazing, wonderful person who I love dearly. But also included in that, when you talk about family, for me anyway, you have to include Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ. They are family. And as long as you can keep that all together and in perspective, I think life is good.
I love that. And that is the perfect way to end this conversation. Kyle, I respect you so much, and I was so excited when you agreed to come on. So thank you for sharing just a little piece of your story today.
Well, thank you, Todd. I appreciate you letting me come on. That's very kind of you.
Well, thank you everybody for listening or watching another episode of Tell Your Story. Remember, you can check out past episodes on Spotify, SoundCloud, iTunes, YouTube, wherever you get it, it's there. I hope today's conversation with Kyle has encouraged you to get out there and tell your story, because every story matters.